This is the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Hey everyone, this is Layla, and welcome to another episode of the Architect Exam Podcast. I'm a registered architect, and when I was studying for my license, I decided to take both ARE boot camps. During that time, I completely fell in love with building codes. I loved them so much that after I got my license, I created the Building Codes 101 course that we use at the Young Architect Academy. But today's episode is different from our usual technical deep dives. We're going to talk about something that changed how I look at building codes forever. And it all starts with remembering what this profession is really about. As a registered architect, your biggest and greatest responsibility is protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And that's not just a fancy line here we memorize. It's really the foundation of how we show up every day to our work. Now, when you're studying for the ARE and working on your projects, you're going to spend a lot of time with building codes. And I'll be honest with you, it can feel really overwhelming at times. You're looking at hundreds of pages of technical requirements. You're trying to memorize exit widths and fire ratings and occupancy classifications. But when you know the history behind them, everything clicks. They stop being random rules and start being hard-earned lessons from real disasters. Now, every exit sign, every panic bar, every sprinkler, they all tell a story. And that's what we're going to really uncover today. Now, we all know that the ARE is really focused on an architect's decision-making and isn't a history exam by any means. But understanding where these codes are coming from helps you make better decisions as an architect. Because the creation of the life safety codes aren't inspired by committees sitting around making up rules. They're really often developed in response to something really bad that happened. So today, I'm going to share 7 stories with you. 7 real disasters that shape the codes we use on an everyday basis. And when you understand the story behind a code requirement, you're never going to forget it. Now, before we get started, I need to give you a heads up. We're going to be talking about real tragedies where people lost their lives. Some of these stories involve difficult details about how these disasters really unfolded. If this topic is sensitive for you or makes you uncomfortable, this might be a good episode to skip. I'll have to catch you on the next one. For everyone else, let's dive into these stories. Now, understanding where codes come from isn't just about passing the ARE. It's about honoring the past and making sure we never repeat these mistakes again. And if you want to follow along or reference these stories later, I've created a 2-page set of notes that covers all 7 disasters and their code impacts. Now, you can grab that at theyoungarchitect.com/disaster. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to walk you through 7 tragedies, starting from 1911 and coming all the way to 2017. We'll move through these fairly quickly, but I'll make sure that you understand both what happened and how it changed the codes we use today. Okay, story 1, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire in 1911 in New York City. Now, let's go back to March 25th, 1911. It's late afternoon at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in Greenwich Village in New York, and the factory occupies the top 3 floors of a 10-story building, employing mostly young immigrant women working at sewing machines. Now, at around 4:40, just before quitting time, a fire breaks out on the 8th floor and spreads rapidly through the fabric scraps and materials that had accumulated throughout the space. Now, when workers tried to evacuate, they discovered that the factory owners had locked the stairwell doors from the outside to prevent workers from taking unauthorized breaks or stealing fabrics. Now, the fire escape couldn't handle the number of people trying to use it, and it collapsed. The firefighters' ladders only reached to the 6th floor, leaving workers on 8th, 9th, and 10th floors with limited escape options. By the time it was over, 146 people had died, and the public outrage was so massive. How could so many people die simply because they couldn't open a door? Now, this tragedy fundamentally changed how we approach egress in buildings. The International Building Code, Chapter 10, exists because of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. Now, the fire gave us requirements that exit doors must be unlocked and operable from the inside with a key. We got panic hardware requirements, those push bars you see on exit doors that anyone can operate even in panic. We also got rules about exit capacity. So you want to calculate how many people need to get out and making sure the exits can handle that number. We got requirements for proper exit access. You can't just have one way out. In 1913, NFPA created the Committee on Safety to Life in response to this fire, which eventually wrote the Building Exits Code of 1927. Now, that document became the foundation for what we now know as NFPA 101, which is the Life Safety Code. The next time you see an exit with a push bar on it, remember that it exists because of this fire. And it needs to work because when it's needed, there's no second chance. Now, if you want to dive deeper into how egress requirements work and how to calculate occupant loads and exit capacities, we cover all that information in Building Codes 101. It's one of the foundational topics that shows up on multiple divisions of the ARE. Now, the idea that people could die because a door was locked shook the country, but sadly, it was not the last time that poor egress design cost lives. Now, just a few decades later, another tragedy would expose how fragile safety can be in crowded spaces. So let's move ahead to 1942.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey there, this is Michael, and I have a quick favor to ask. If you're finding value in this free ARE podcast, please take a second to follow, like, subscribe, and leave a review or a comment on whatever platform you happen to hear this podcast. By sharing knowledge, we all rise together.
So story 2, we're going to talk about the Cocoanut Grove Nightclub Fire in 1942 in Boston. So let's jump ahead to November 28th, 1942. It's the Saturday after Thanksgiving in Boston, and the Cocoanut Grove nightclub is packed with over 1,000 people, well beyond its capacity, which was 460. Now, the club is decorated to look like a tropical paradise with artificial palm trees, fabric draped everywhere, and highly flammable decorations covering every surface. And around 10:15 p.m., a fire starts in the basement lounge and spreads with terrifying speed. Now, everything in the club is flammable, the fake palm trees, the fabric decorations, the leather seats. So within minutes, the entire building is engulfed. So when people rushed for the exits, they encountered a critical problem. The main entrance had a revolving door that became completely jammed as panic crowds are pushing into it from both sides. Other exits were locked or hidden behind decorations. Some emergency exits opened inward instead of outward, making them impossible to open when crowds pushed against them. So the fire produced thick, toxic smoke, and most people died, unfortunately, from smoke inhalation. And that night, 492 people died. The Cocoanut Grove fire changed nightclub and assembly occupancy codes forever. And many of these changes extended far beyond nightclubs to all assembly spaces. And then revolving doors were either banned at main exits or required to have additional conventional doors that swing outward. Yeah, and I'm sure you've probably noticed these buildings with revolving doors always have regular swing doors right next to them. And that's because of the Cocoanut Grove. So we have requirements for exit doors to swing in the direction of egress travel. If people are exiting a space, the door swings in the same direction they're moving. Same thing with panic hardware, which became mandatory on exit doors in assembly occupancies. We got strict occupant load calculation requirements. So now every assembly space has a maximum capacity and owners cannot exceed it. And then interior finish requirements got much stricter. The IBC now has flame spread ratings and smoke development ratings for materials used in occupied spaces. There's also emergency lighting and exit signs became required so people can find their way in case of an emergency, and then even when it's dark and smoky. The Coconut Grove fire taught us that when panic hits, exit systems need to be intuitive, obvious, and physically impossible to jam. Because in an emergency, you have seconds to get it right. Now, interior finishes and flame spread ratings are something we dig into pretty thoroughly in Building Codes 101. Understanding how materials are tested and classified is huge for both exam and your practice. Now, our third story takes us to another type of a building. So one where fire safety failures have devastating consequences for most vulnerable occupants. So story 3, Our Lady of the Angels School Fire in 1958 in Chicago. Now, December 1st, 1958. It's a Monday afternoon at Our Lady of the Angels School on the west side of Chicago, and it serves approximately 1,600 students in kindergarten through 8th grade. At about 2 p.m., a fire starts in a trash barrel at the bottom of a stairwell in the basement. Now, because there was no fire alarm system and no smoke detectors, the fire burns undetected for about 20 minutes. Here's what made this fire so deadly from a building systems perspective. Now, the school had open, unenclosed stairs that acted like chimneys, pulling smoke and fire upward. The building was filled with combustible materials. There was wood floors, wood trims, flammable ceiling tiles. So the fire spread rapidly through these materials and into the attic space above the classrooms. A heavy door on the first floor landing blocked the fire from entering the first floor. But the second floor landing had no such door. Fire and smoke spread freely through the second floor hallways, cutting off the main escape route for students and teachers. Now, 95 people died, 92 children, and 3 nuns. Most died from smoke inhalation. Now, the tragedy here was that the school had passed a fire inspection just weeks before, but due to a grandfathering clause in the 1949 Fire Code, older schools were not required to have the same safety features as newly constructed schools. So the Our Lady of the Angels fire led to a complete overhaul of school fire safety requirements across the country. Now, fire alarm systems became mandatory in all schools, with pull stations and audible alarms throughout the building that connect directly to the fire department. Smoke detection systems were required to provide early warning before the fire spreads. Enclosed exit stairs became required, so there's no more open stairways that let the fire and smoke travel freely between the floors. And then also fire doors and smoke barriers were required to compartmentalize buildings and slow the fire spread. Emergency lighting and exit signs became standard in all schools. Schools built before these changes were required to retrofit these systems, and the grandfathering exemptions were eliminated for schools when children's lives were at risk. The fire taught us that early detection and containment are just as important as exit capacity. You need to know there's a fire early, and you need to slow it down long enough for everyone to go out safely. Now, the lesson from Our Lady of the Angels focused on early detection and containment. But our next story, which happened just over 40 years later, proved that even with modern detection systems, buildings still need automatic suppression. So, which brings us to story number 4, the MGM Grand Fire in 1980 in Las Vegas. So, November 21st, 1980, the MGM Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas is one of the largest hotels in the world. It's a 26-story tower with over 2,000 rooms and about 5,000 people inside on this particular morning. Around 7 a.m., a fire starts in a restaurant on the first floor due to an electrical fault in a wall outlet. Here's a critical issue. The MGM Grand was built in 1973, and the casino area was not required to have sprinklers. The building department had specifically exempted the casino from sprinkler requirements to save money, which was about $192,000. The reasoning was that since the casino operated 24 hours a day, someone would always be around to spot a fire. But the restaurant wasn't open at 7 a.m. The fire burned undetected until it reached flashover and spread across the entire casino floor. Now here's where the building system failures compound. The building's elevator shafts and stairwells weren't properly sealed. They acted like chimneys, pulling smoke straight up into the tower where thousands of people were sleeping. Many of the stairwell doors locked behind people when they entered for security reasons. So when the smoke started filling the stairwells from below, people were trapped with no way to get out. The fire alarm system required manual activation, so in the chaos, nobody activated the alarm in the hotel tower. Most guests didn't know there was a fire until smoke entered their rooms. Now, 85 people died, mostly from smoke inhalation. Another 650 were injured. Then just 81 days later, another fire at the Las Vegas Hilton killed 8 people. Now, these two fires within 3 months created massive public outcry. Nevada went from having some of the most lenient fire codes to having the strictest fire safety regulations in the country. Mandatory sprinklers in every high-rise taller than 55 feet and every large public area. No grandfathered exceptions. All existing buildings had to be retrofitted. All new buildings, 3 stories or higher, must have sprinklers. Pressurized elevator shafts and stairwells to prevent the smoke from traveling vertically through the building. Smoke barriers and compartmentalization to limit smoke spread between floors. Also, automatic fire alarm systems that activate without human intervention. Fire-rated doors on guest rooms required to hold back fire for 45 minutes. The MGM fire proved something really critical. You cannot rely on people to detect fires early or operate systems correctly during emergencies. Buildings do need automatic systems that work whether anyone is paying attention or not. An NFPA investigator summed it up perfectly. With sprinklers, it would have been a 1 or 2 sprinkler fire, and we would never have heard about it. Now, fire protection systems and sprinkler requirements can get pretty technical. Inside Building Codes 101, we break down how these systems work together and when they're required. It's the kind of thing that makes way more sense when you see it applied to real building scenarios. Now, while the MGM Grand Fire was about fire protection systems failing, our next tragedy happened the very same year, and it involved a completely different type of failure, structural engineering. Which brings us to story number 5, the Hyatt Regency Walkway collapse in 1981 in Kansas City, July 17th, 1981. The Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City is hosting a tea dance in its large atrium lobby. There are about 1,600 people in attendance, some on the lobby floor. Others were standing on 2 suspended walkways that span across the atrium on the 2nd and 4th floors. Around 7 p.m., there's a loud cracking sound. The connections holding the walkways fail. Both walkways collapse, with the 4th floor walkway falling on the 2nd floor walkway below it, and both crashing down onto the crowded lobby floor. There were 114 people that were killed, more than 200 were injured. So what happened from an engineering perspective here? Well, during construction, there was a design change that nobody properly analyzed. The original design called for continuous steel rods running from the ceiling and all the way down through both walkways. But the contractor said that was too difficult to build. Instead, they changed it so that the 4th floor walkway hung from the ceiling, and then the 2nd floor walkway hung from the 4th floor walkway. This seems like a small change, but it doubled the load on the connection at the fourth floor. The connection now had to support both walkways, not just one. So nobody ran the calculations to verify this change would work. The structural engineer gave verbal approval for the shop drawing modification without any follow-up calculations, and the connections were undersized from the day they were installed. Now, this tragedy completely changed how we handle structural design and construction modifications. The American Society of Civil Engineers adopted clear policy that structural engineers are now ultimately responsible for reviewing shop drawings by fabricators. Now, before the Hyatt incident, the standard was that the shop drawing review was only for adherence to design concept, not for engineering adequacy. So that changed after this collapse. Now, shop drawing approval requirements were strengthened. Engineers can't just stamp drawings without actually reviewing and verifying changes. Special inspections became required for critical structural elements during the construction, and professional responsibility and liability became a major focus in engineering calculation and practice. Now, the review process for any design changes became much more rigorous. You can't just make modifications without proper analysis and documentation. Now, the Kansas City administration doubled its staff and dedicated a single engineer comprehensively to all aspects of each reviewed project. Now, this collapse really taught us that structural systems need to be designed as complete systems, and that any changes to those systems need same level of engineering rigor as the original design. There are no small changes when gravity is involved. Now, let's jump ahead a little bit, about 20 years to 2003. By this time, you'd think we'd learned our lessons about assembly occupancies and fire safety. But our next story shows how dangerous it can be when buildings are grandfathered under old codes and modern materials aren't properly tested.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Which brings us to story number 6, the station Nightclub fire in 2003 at West Warwick in Rhode Island. Now, February 20th, 2003, the station nightclub is hosting a concert by the band Great White. There were about 440 people in the club, licensed for 404 occupants. At 11:07 p.m., the band's tour manager sets up pyrotechnics as part of the show. Sparklers that shoot sparks into the air for visual effect. Nobody had obtained a permit for these pyrotechnics. Here's the problem. The club owner had installed polyurethane foam on the walls and ceiling as soundproofing. Now, this foam is incredibly flammable, and it produces thick, toxic black smoke when it burns. The sparks from the pyrotechnics ignite this foam immediately. What makes this fire particularly notable is that it was caught on video from start to finish. The footage shows how terrifyingly fast modern synthetic materials can create unsurvivable conditions. Now, within 30 seconds, flames spread across the ceiling. Within 90 seconds, the entire building is engulfed. And within 5 minutes, temperatures inside reached 1800 degrees. Now, people rushed for the exits, but most head for the main entrance because that's where they came from. That entrance becomes a deadly bottleneck. The club had other exits, but many people didn't see them or don't think to use them. That night, 100 people died. Another 230 were injured. Now, here's an important code issue. The building was originally constructed as a restaurant in 1946. Under the fire code at that time, restaurants of that size did not require sprinklers. When it was converted to a nightclub decades later, that exemption should have disappeared and sprinklers should have been installed, but they weren't. The station nightclub fire led to significant changes in assembly occupancy requirements, which were included mandatory sprinklers in nightclubs and also certain assembly occupancies, even if they're under the size threshold that previously exempted them. The International Building Code changed the sprinkler and threshold for Group A2 occupancies from 300 occupants to 100 occupants. Stricter interior finish testing requirements, particularly for foam materials used in sound dampening or decoration. The codes now specifically forbid non-fire retardant flexible polyurethane foam in nightclubs. Regulations around pyrotechnics in enclosed spaces, permits required, fire watch is required, inspection of surrounding materials as well. NFPA strengthened provisions banning the use of pyrotechnic devices in buildings smaller than 10,000 square feet. Now, in terms of the elimination of grandfathering clauses, Rhode Island changed its fire code so that all venues with capacity over 150 people must have sprinklers, regardless of when they were built. The video documentation of this fire became a powerful teaching tool showing exactly how fast fire can spread in buildings with synthetic materials. Now, when you have less than 2 minutes to get out, everything about your egress system needs to work perfectly. Our final story brings us to 2017, and it shifts focus from interior life safety to something that had been overlooked: what we put on the outside of our buildings. So story number 7, Grenfell Tower Fire in 2017 in London. So June 14th, 2017. Grenfell Tower is a 24-story residential building in West London, home to about 600 people. At about 1 a.m., a fire starts in a fourth-floor apartment, likely from a malfunctioning refrigerator. The fire should have been contained to that apartment. The building's original design had fire-resistant concrete construction that could compartmentalize fires. But here's what made the fire catastrophic. In 2016, the building underwent a renovation that added new exterior cladding. There are decorative panels covering the outside of the building to improve appearance and add insulation. Now, these aluminum composite panels had polyethylene core, essentially plastic sandwiched between thin aluminum sheets. Now, when exposed to fire, this material is highly combustible. Now, the fire breaks out on the fourth floor apartment through a window, hits the exterior cladding, and it spreads with terrifying speeds. Now, the cladding acts like a wick, carrying fire up to the outside of the building. And within minutes, the entire exterior of the 24-story tower is engulfed. The fire re-enters the building at multiple floors through windows. Now, 72 people die in what becomes the deadliest residential fire in the UK since World War II. Now, the investigation revealed that the cladding system used on Grenfell Tower would not have met fire safety standards in many countries, including the United States. It was chosen primarily because it was cheaper than fire-resistant alternatives. The Grenfell Tower Fire led to immediate changes in building codes worldwide. So, major limitations on combustible cladding materials for high-rise buildings. The UK government announced a ban on the use of combustible materials in cladding on new residential buildings taller than 18 meters. Stricter requirements for fire-rated exterior wall assemblies. The focus now expanded beyond interior materials to include the building envelope itself. Mandatory inspection and remediation of existing buildings with similar cladding systems. Hundreds of buildings across the UK had to have dangerous cladding removed. There's also increased focus on the fire performance of building envelope systems. So it's not just about what's inside the building. The exterior materials can become massive fire hazards if we don't choose them carefully. Now, in the United States, ACM cladding with polyethylene cores had been effectively banned on high-rise buildings for decades because it couldn't pass the NFPA 285 test. The Grenfell fire reinforced why those testing requirements do exist. The fire reminded us that safety isn't just about interior protection. The building envelope itself can become a catastrophic fire hazard when combustible materials are used without proper testing and verification. So there you have it, 7 tragedies spanning over a century. Each one taught us something critical about building safety. Triangle Shirtwaist gave us egress requirements and panic hardware. Coconut Grove taught us about exit door operation, capacity, and interior finishes. Our Lady of the Angels showed us the importance of early detection, enclosed stairs, and eliminating grandfathering clauses. The MGM Grand proved that automatic systems like sprinklers can't be optional. The Hyatt Regency demonstrated that structural review processes and shop drawing approval matter. The Station Nightclub showed us how fast materials can burn and why sprinklers are critical. And Grenfell Tower reminded us that exterior materials matter just as much as interior ones. Now, when you're studying building codes for the ARE, I do want you to remember these stories. When you see requirements for panic hardware, for sprinklers, for fire-rated walls, for pressurized stairwells, for exterior cladding testing, remember that these aren't arbitrary rules. They exist because real people died, and these people's deaths taught us lessons that we've written into our building codes to make sure it does not happen again. Every code requirement represents someone's worst day. Our job as architects is to design buildings where those worst days never happen. Understanding the history behind building codes doesn't just help you pass your exams. It helps you understand why these codes matter. And when you understand why something matters, you'll never cut corners on it. You'll specify the right fire-rated assemblies. You'll verify exit capacities. You'll coordinate with engineers on structural connections. And you'll also pay attention to exterior cladding choices. Because you'll remember that somewhere in history, someone died because those things weren't done right. If you want a quick reference for these 7 stories, I've put together a 2-page set of notes that covers all the disasters and their code impacts. You can grab that at theyoungarchitect.com/disaster. And if you're ready to really understand building codes from the ground up, come study with me inside my Building Codes 101 course. It's part of the ARE 101 membership at the Young Architect Academy, and you can find all the details at youngarchitect.com/codes101. Thanks for listening to this episode. I know it was heavier than our usual content, but I think these are stories that every registered architect should know about. This is Layla, and I'll catch you at the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast. Ready to take your studying to the next level? Visit our online ARE Architecture School website at academy.youngarchitect.com to learn more about how we can help you. See you next time.